It is. It's page 2, the middle paragraph, Zach.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right, we've hit 6 o'clock. I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the open work session in the city of North Kansas City, May 4th, 2021. Eric.
Thank you, sir. Before we begin the item that's on tonight's work session agenda, I'd like to call on our IT manager, Stephen Roberts, just to give you a little update on an internet issue that's going on right now.
Thanks, Eric. This is Stephen. Just sort of as an FYI, there's a outage with the domain name system and about a quarter of the internet that's been going on for about an hour or two. And the only reason I bring it up is because just depending on a viewer's internet access, how they access the internet, they may or not be able to pull up our website, which would then mean that they may not be able to hit the Zoom link and participate in the meeting. So if anybody, any of your constituents or anybody expresses concerns, it's not an NKC thing. It's not even a website thing. It's more of a broad internet issue. So, we've reported the issue and we're waiting for a resolution. So that's what I got.
Can I ask a quick follow-up to that?
Sure.
What's protocol if one of us gets kicked off? Do we just proceed with the meeting no matter what, and we just don't get to vote?
Eric?
Well, that's an interesting question, sir. This is one of the perils of, conducting meetings, I guess, in this manner. I don't know of another. If that were to happen, I guess you could revisit. Of course, this is a work session. You don't take formal votes. Maybe it'll be resolved by the regular meeting, but I don't know of any other way to do it. If one of you gets kicked off, I mean, you have to be, present to vote. If one of you gets kicked off, contact us. We'll see if we can hustle and get you a phone link or something that'll allow you to participate in the meeting. But that's something. This is not something we've anticipated before.
Okay. If it comes down to calling in, that's a viable option, though. If we have to,
that's legal. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Just a side note. This shouldn't, and I'm finding wood to knock on here, shouldn't affect us and you guys because I've emailed you the link and you have access to it. It's only someone who's trying to go to www.nkc.org to find the link to do it. So it shouldn't affect internet access. Again, knock on wood.
All right. Well, thank you, Stephen. So with that, tonight's topic is the North Kansas City Flex Bus service. So in February, the City Council indicated a desire to review the Flex Bus service before the next service contract renewal with the Kansas City Area Transit Authority, KCATA, which is set to occur prior to July 1st. We're working on 6 months contracts these days. So KCATA staff is here tonight to discuss the results of a recent survey of riders, opportunities for cost cutting and revenue enhancement, and opportunities for broadened service through the Flex bus service. So with that, I'm not sure exactly which member of the KCATA staff is going to take the lead. So I'll call on KCATA to take it from here, and please identify yourself and take it away.
This is David Johnson with KCATA. Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Eric, for that introduction. I'm Vice President of Planning and Strategy for the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority, here to present options for you to consider tonight. And I oversee service planning, marketing, and customer service. And with me are Don Boland, who's your normal regional operations liaison, your normal day-to-day contact, and John Moore, who has joined our team recently as planning and scheduling manager, replacing Sean Strait, if you ever met or interacted with Sean in previous sessions. John joins us from KDOT, where he was the state public transit manager. So with that, I'll go ahead and share slides we have prepared for this evening. And feel free to ask questions at any point. Happy to be interrupted. Want to make sure we're explaining things correctly. And if you have any clarifying questions or at any time, just don't hesitate to interrupt. So a couple things we'll cover: the current service as it's designed, ridership trends, results of the survey we conducted, proposals for modifying the service, and some cost-saving options. So the service we're discussing tonight is Flex Service. It falls into what transit professionals call demand responsive. So that's basically any service that's responsive to a specific trip request. The opposite of that would be, of course, a fixed route service, which requires the customer to just walk to or from a bus stop for a service that's running on a fixed schedule and a fixed route. So these are flex trips. They're basically kind of the equivalent of a shared taxi service. And this service is wholly funded by the city of North Kansas City and operates only within the city boundary. It runs Monday through Friday from 5 to 9:30, Saturday from 5 to 9, and Sundays and holidays from 10 to 6. Typically, we request customers book these trips in advance, but same-day requests are available pending availability of vehicles and space on them. We're currently in a 6-month contract, as mentioned. We do prefer our communities be on yearly contracts, but obviously it's whatever works for you. And to the right, you'll see the North Kansas City zone as designated by Route 298. And then the adjacent Gladstone zone, which is being modified in October. It's getting larger, covering parts of Kansas City, Missouri, and Gladstone. Our current ridership, as you can see here, has fluctuated a little bit with the pandemic, but has been relatively stable. The differences between weekdays and weekend days is generally reflected in the level of service and then just overall demand. And across 2019, 2020, and 2021. So as you can see, we've almost rebounded to a pre-pandemic ridership level. Moving into the survey results, we made this survey available on board and online for the month of April. We received 28 responses. Given the amount of ridership, that's a pretty good response rate. We've highlighted some items here based on demographics and how satisfied people are with the service, and then how they actually use the service. A couple I'll highlight right now. 70% of respondents live in North Kansas City proper. Majority are over 50. 10% have another way to get around. So most are what we call transit dependent. And 90% rate the service as good or excellent. Most people are using the bus to get to work, the flex service specifically. 50% daily riders, and 84, a little bit less than that. The thing that most people don't realize about these flexible services is that people do use them to connect to routes to go further beyond wherever the flex route runs. 201, the North Oak service that's funded by Kansas City, Missouri, that runs through North Kansas City on Burlington, is the most used fixed route for transferring from the service. 80% of your riders have been using the service for several years. Only 28% use the service in the evening or late evening, and that'll be relevant when we talk about cost savings. The rest of these slides here kind of go into some detail. I won't read through every one unless you're interested in a specific item. We tried to highlight on the prior slide the ones that were most relevant. Obviously, we asked about age and how long you've been riding.
Can I ask a question real quick on data here?
Sure.
So you're presenting survey results. Do we not have any like actual like point-to-point data on where all these rides are starting and ending?
We do have data on that later in the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Obviously, 64116 is the zip code for North Kansas City, and we do have a few respondents saying they're coming from elsewhere. It's a couple south of the river and Kansas. The slide on, or the chart on the left indicates other reasons for using the service, gas prices, parking, or disabilities. Don't really have an explanation for why Thursday seems to be more popular, but with the small data set, it could be just an anomaly. And as you can see there, the evening and late evening are the lowest utilization periods, according to the responses, and ridership backs that up. You can see the other uses for the service besides work trips, which represent the majority of respondents. Shopping being next, medical, and leisure. And we'll see that in detail with the trip locations. And here's the destinations. And so the trip data is the chart on the bottom. The survey self-reported responses are on the top. So obviously we're going to get finer grain detail with the actual trip data. And as part of every trip request, they do give us a origin address and destination address. And I should note on ridership from earlier that ridership counting in transportation is always done as unlinked passenger trips. So they don't represent a round trip. They represent a one-way trip. So you can see the top locations. Most of these shouldn't be a surprise. The only grocery store in town, the hospital, a couple of apartment complexes, the casino. Good satisfaction with the service as it is designed today. And it's on time, and that's also borne out in our own on-time performance data. Customers perceive what's actually happening. Some additional comments, generally complementary to the existing service. They see it as a lifeline, users without alternative transportation. Some comments about additional service, specifically Route 233, which has been suspended. The KCMO funded 201 and a modified Route 238 that runs through North Kansas City. That modified service will take effect in October as part of our major service redesign. And then obviously customers noted that our dispatch system needs updated, and our slides where we talk about modernizing the service will address that.
Question about the route number 233. Is that not running at all in North Kansas City now?
Correct.
Eek. Okay. And when is that anticipated to possibly return?
So
I believe our contract pays for that, doesn't it? On that fixed route?
Yes. Don, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, no, so the 233 is actually funded in part by North Kansas City through what we call inter-jurisdictional city or boundaries. So your North Kansas City pays 50% of the miles that actually run through North Kansas City on that route. And sorry, okay. I'm Don Bullen, I'm your contract manager. I haven't met all of you yet, but I do look forward to meeting you in person one day.
When do you anticipate the 233 coming back, Don?
Actually, I'm going to deflect that one to David.
Yeah, so as part of our redesign, the coverage will be retained. It will just be represented by a new route number, 238. So the part of 233 that goes through North Kansas City will be part of a longer route 238 that will go all the way up to Maple Woods. And as the current 233 does into downtown Kansas City.
So that 238 will also go along Armour Road like the 233 then?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And for those who haven't been following the details of public transportation in the region over the last year, it's been quite a wild ride, literally. Initially, we were responding to emergency stay-at-home orders, so we suspended some service. And then as those started to let up, we added service back in, only to be hit by labor shortages due to actual COVID cases and quarantines. So we had to reduce service again in the fourth quarter, and we've restored some of that in the first and second quarters, and we'll doing more restoration in October. So the meat of tonight's presentation is to talk about what we're proposing. We heard your message about the cost of the service and the utilization, and we think we have some options here that you will appreciate. So unfortunately, as a public agency, our costs are somewhat fixed. So cutting the actual sort of unit cost is not really something that we are able to do. We do run a service that's fairly, I wouldn't say rigid, but we do have a labor agreement. We pay a living wage, good benefits, pension program, and so all that's reflected in our fixed costs. What we can do is talk about the hours of the service. So those hours represent units of work, not at an hour per hour basis, but sort of in a shift. And so if we were to adjust the schedule, either the number of days in the week where the service operates or the length of time the service operates on a day where it extends beyond a shift, that would reduce the cost of service. So we call that the adjusting the schedule proposal, part of the proposal. The second option would be to reintroduce the fare. This route is currently part of our zero fare program. And so because it's a scheduled ahead service, it falls into the zero fare category, which is currently being offset by federal funding through the CARES Act and subsequent COVID relief funding bills. And that's nothing that you have to worry about. We're covering that because we intended the zero fare program to be regional, and that money covers that cost. Prior to that suspension, which occurred in March of 2020, the fare was a quarter. The rest of the region's services were charging $1.50. So if we were to modernize this service to become truly on demand, meaning you could request a trip at the time you wish to travel, same day, we've made a decision, sort of a variation on the zero fare program, where on-demand services, which require typically less work from the consumer, they don't have to walk to and from a bus stop. The vehicle is coming to pick them up where they are and taking them to where they want to go. Those would resume or retain a fare, and we would like to keep the region consistent on a base fare of $1.50. I know there were historic reasons for selecting 25 cents, but if cost of the service is a major concern, that would be one way to reduce the city's contribution to the service. But again, we would recommend that you only introduce that fare in coordination with making the service on demand, which we are planning to do regardless of what happens today. Also, overall, the modernization of our flex operations. Don't need to go into too much history unless you have detailed questions, but our software platform is out of date, and it affects our ability to be flexible with different community demands. So one of those obviously is the inability to offer on-demand trip requests. Dispatching is currently manual. So every day when the trip requests are combined, a person manually builds a route based on those trip requests. Modernization will make that all automatic, and there's been lots of advances in this space in the past few years. Johnson County and Wyandotte County are currently operating zones that use this modern software, and we'll be piloting a new vendor software this year and would like to make this zone part of that pilot. That pilot would also eliminate manual fare collection or reduce it by offering a mobile app for payment. So you would book and pay in the same mobile app. You'd also be able to track your vehicle and know when it's arriving using that same mobile app. That platform also allows virtual bus stops that would allow us to be more efficient with the vehicle, meaning shorter trips. And but it would require customers to do a little bit of walking, but not quite as much as walking to a traditional bus stop. And then finally, our combined option, which could group the two zones you see on the right together into one larger zone. So that would combine the funding of Gladstone, Kansas City, Missouri, and potentially even Riverside, who we're in current conversations with. Obviously, Riverside is not directly connected to Gladstone, so that presents a little bit of a problem if we don't combine North Kansas City with the Gladstone zone. But we want to make sure that the service is as useful as possible, and we're uniquely qualified as a regional bi-state agency that is a federal funding partner to do just that.
Quick question on combining the zones. Would that affect service or service times at any possible juncture? Or would you add more buses, or what would you do at that point?
That's an excellent question. So for the Gladstone zone in October, we are enlarging that service area and adding to the days and hours of service. So that would be the one drawback to this option, is that you would be essentially losing a little bit of control over the span, fare, and the hours of service. So by pooling resources, you gain, but you also lose a little bit of that autonomy with how you design the service. So this service is, as it's currently designed, is a little bit unique. The fare is lower. It's 7 days a week, and the hours vary from adjacent zones. So we could carve out an exception for just North Kansas City coverage with a combined zone. We do that currently in Johnson County, for example, on Saturdays. The microtransit zone there covers parts of Overland Park that include the farmers market. Overland Park contributes to the cost of that, but only for Saturday. During the week, it only covers the regular zone, which of course doesn't include that area.
So I'm going to follow up on that. So as what's on here, you could go from zone to zone.
Currently, you cannot, but in this combined proposal, you would be able to. So and that's why we have the stars on the map. So in some initial conversation with staff, it was noted that there's one grocery store in North Kansas City, which is not a star on here, but it's the Save-A-Lot, and we saw that in the trip data, right? So the rest of the red stars on the map represent other grocery stores. So you see several other grocery stores that are in the Gladstone zone. Those would be available trips for people using what's currently the North Kansas City service, if you combined.
Okay.
And then of course, the two that are along North Oak that are not in the zone, you would get to those on a regular bus.
Okay.
7 days.
Thank you.
And one more follow-up on that. If we combine zones, are we going to have 2, 3 vehicles, or is it going to be one vehicle shared across the zones? What would the availability look like?
It would be more vehicles, but it probably would not be additional cost to North Kansas City. But unfortunately, we can't specify a cost saving, and I'll get to that in the next slide, because we don't yet know what the trip demand of being a larger zone, combined zone, and being on demand. On demand usually triggers more trips because people obviously appreciate being able to travel sort of whenever they're ready. And then the larger zone, we anticipate obviously more trips by having a larger coverage area.
Quick question. I'm a new councilman, so this is all new to me. So pardon me if this is a stupid question, but if we open up and combine with the Gladstone zone, then it's reciprocal. So if I understand correctly, so people from Gladstone would also be able to use the service to come to North Kansas City So that might help them as well reach places like North Kansas City Hospital, Harrah's, local businesses here in North Kansas City. Is that correct?
That is correct. And the way we bill this service, you would be billed for the trips that originate in North Kansas City only. Is that right, Don?
Yeah, no, that's correct and well said. So basically, what we look at is when we're looking into pricing structure, when you have a multiple municipality agreement like this, is it's boarding and alighting. So people getting on and off a bus in a certain geographic location, those passenger trips are counted as well as the miles within your municipality. And we do have a lot of requests from Gladstone, people who use their flex service to come down to Chapels and Chicken and Pickle, funny enough. Yeah.
So we would be covering
I have a question for you. Go ahead, Jesse.
Sorry. So we would be covering costs for trips that originate and end in North Kansas City and the return trip, because you said alight and dislike. Is that when they get off the bus, right?
Correct. So if a passenger boards in North Kansas City and then travels into Gladstone.
Okay. But if they came from Gladstone and went into North Kansas City, we would not cover the cost of that one?
You would cover it to the border of North Kansas City. So your costs would incur when they entered into Kansas City. That's where the mileage would come into play. The fortunate part about North Kansas City is your geographic location. It's relatively small in comparison. So you would only be paying for passenger trips that originate or alight within North Kansas City. So one person comes in, they travel 2 miles, you're paying for those miles and that passenger trip within the city.
Councilmember Saban.
Yeah. Currently, they can take a fixed route service to North Kansas City and then transfer to the Flex bus to go wherever in the city they wanted. Isn't that true?
That is correct.
And that would go both ways. So we would still have that communication link between the various areas.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
I have to let everyone know that I have a certain bias in this area. I was one of the first drivers of the Flex service in North Kansas City. I did that for several markups. I'm retired from the ATA. And after the introduction of what you talked about, the ridership and where people were going and who they are, it hasn't changed much in the almost 2 decades now since it started. And except that in the beginning, it was a combination service, fixed route and flex. In the early morning hours, it was a fixed route and people would use it to get to connecting routes in North Kansas City for fixed route transit, and in the reverse in the afternoon. And the on-demand was in between and in the evening. I have no idea why that was abandoned. It seemed to work quite well at the time. Is there a possibility of some kind of hybrid service?
Yes, it's always possible. We still have some hybrid services. There aren't that many of them currently. I think if the main goal is cost reduction, though, fixed route is generally more expensive to operate on an sort of a time basis. Per trip, which I think has been the main focus here, fixed route is actually cheaper, generally because you carry more people. The vehicle's larger.
Well, it was a combination using the same size vehicle.
Oh, yeah. Well, we have used these same size vehicles on fixed routes. We don't do that very often because generally where we've been headed as an agency is that, larger vehicles are suited for where there's the demand for it, right? So if we don't have the demand, then we would put a smaller vehicle. And in the cases where there are smaller vehicles, we generally assume that there isn't either adequate walking infrastructure or density to generate the trips required for a fixed route. And so what you're seeing, especially up north and further north from North Kansas City, of course, is we are migrating to more flexible services. Number one, because many stakeholders are asking for that, and it makes more sense because the distances are further, the infrastructure isn't conducive to walking sometimes, and the density is lower.
I have a question. When you're talking about accruing the cost that we would be responsible for starting in North Kansas City to go somewhere else, does that, I'm just wondering if the cost correlates with the distance. So if we did door to door, save a lot, which it looked like a lot of people did in North Kansas City, it's a relatively short distance when you compare that to going all the way north on Antioch and 72nd to get to that Hy-Vee or that Walmart. Would that be a much larger bill that we would get? Is it based on distance?
Councilman Toll, yeah, no, Councilman Toll, that's a great question. So let's say you boarded the bus at Chicken and Pickle. We're just going to throw that one out there. You boarded the bus, you traveled the 1 mile to the border of North Kansas City. That's all the liability that North Kansas City would have until that passenger returned back into North Kansas City. Then the city would be obligated for that trip length within as they come back into the city. Once they leave North Kansas City, they would then go, there's a small section there where it's actually KCMO or into Gladstone. And those cities would then incur the billing for that mileage. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, it does. That's what I was wondering. Yeah, you answered it. Thank you.
Councilmember Roberts and Councilmember Smith.
Yeah, my question is, do we have the numbers for Gladstone currently? Like if they're using a flex-based service, what their ridership is, just to see if we're only getting about 50 an average a day. If they're doing like 100 or 150, that's going to obviously increase our costs if they're coming down here more often. Just curious if you have a similar slide that might show where they're traveling and how many riders they have per day.
We don't have that in the deck, but I think Don could probably pop off the Gladstone Flex ridership currently.
I can't quote that number directly, but I can tell you it's not quite as robust as North Kansas City. You guys have the unique honor of having one of the largest flex routes as far as riders and capacity in our system. The only other one that comes close, that North Kansas City comes close to, is South Kansas City. Unfortunately, their ridership is lower than yours. But I'd be happy to get that information for you.
One thing I'm concerned about is that the numbers haven't changed much over the last 20 years almost now. I just wonder if we're doing enough to really internally in North Kansas City publicizing the availability of this service. I'm not sure that we've actually tried that in an effective kind of a way, which would increase ridership even more if we could.
Councilmember Smith, you have something to add?
Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about how the fee structure works and how we pay for this mile or that. But each time we've approved a contract, there's been a number attached for the next 6 months, regardless of how many riders, because we don't know that for the next 6 months. How does that work with, we were just projecting ridership based on the past? Because each time we just had a big number that came up. So how are the pricing structures worked out?
Yeah, with that, I'll go to the next slide, which talks about the cost savings if you were to modify the current service. So the current service is funded exclusively by North Kansas City, so you pay all of the cost of that service. What we were talking about previously when combining with Gladstone, you would pay a trip-based part of that service. So because you're combining, that's sort of the benefit of combining. We can't quantify those cost savings, but it would be a little bit more, I guess, fine grain billing that you would see, right? As opposed to today, which is just essentially a fixed cost for the hours and days of service. So going through these cost saving numbers here, the manual dispatch that I referred to with modernization, or just eliminating that on Saturday and Sunday where we don't have other flex services using dispatch, that's a minimal savings, and we couldn't even quantify it. It's pretty minimal. And for days of the week or changing the hours of the day where the service runs, we do have concrete numbers to provide. So on a 12-month basis, the current weekday service covers 155,000 of the current contract. If you were to apply the Saturday hours of service to weekdays, that would go down to 118,000. If you were to apply the Sunday hours to weekdays, it would go down to 78,000. And again, this is just reducing the shift time from the current employees.
This is Bryant. If the slide, if I wrote it down right, that's just a 30-minute difference, 5 days
Yeah.
a week, right?
9:30, right? 5 to 9, 5 to 9:30.
Yeah, that's what I have.
Our weekend, and Don can explain this in more detail because it has to do with labor rates on the weekends. Don, do you mind explaining that?
Sorry, it took me a minute to find my mute button there. So there's a couple of things to think about on this. With the Saturday service, you have one bus that runs slightly shorter hours. You do end up saving some additional costs in that piece. The biggest changes from what your Sunday service looks like, which is a 10 to 6, versus almost the 16 hours that you're running currently on weekday and Saturdays. So that's where your cost savings actually come into play.
I think what Brian was looking at is if you go from on the Saturday hours, we're literally shaving half an hour off of saving $37,000.
Yes, that was. I mean, that's what jumped out at me. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the Sunday's a non-starter because people take it to work.
Yeah.
Because we can't start it at 10 a.m. That doesn't work. But
and then that was going to kind of raise my next question of do we have an idea of what the ridership numbers are between 9 and 9:30 on weekdays?
Well, two different things. One, I will definitely take a look at that and verify those numbers for you and come back and just make sure that we are accurate on that. And the second thing is the ridership numbers in between those two periods of time, we can get for you on a very specific level.
Okay, thank you.
I'd also like some information. Looking at the start time at 5 a.m. on the weekends and Saturday, I'd like to know if we have a lot of people between 5 and 6, if we can push that start time later. I know they connect to other buses or what have you, but yeah, I'd like the numbers from 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. as well.
If we can actually just get it like 5 a.m. to 7 a.m., all 7 or all 6 of those days, I'd like to see. I don't know how intense those numbers you have are, but if there's 30-minute increments specifically, like if we start at 5:30, maybe we save significant money. If there's one person riding between 5 and 5:30, might be worth cutting some hours there as well.
Sure, not a problem.
And how about
I'm sorry, go ahead, David.
I was just going to continue through the chart here. If you were to eliminate Saturday service on an annual basis, that would be a savings of 24,000, and Sunday service 18,000. Obviously, we wouldn't recommend just cutting Saturday. So really, you would look at either cutting Sunday only or cutting Saturday and Sunday together. And then the fare issue, we had, if you were using 2019 ridership, which was pre-pandemic, you could save or get back, I guess, from the cost of service by raising the fare to $1.50, an additional $20,000 per year. And then, as I mentioned earlier, combining the zones, it's kind of not possible for us to estimate any cost savings yet, just because we don't know what the demand will be. that is the end of our prepared presentation. So again, we've got some follow-up items that were noted today or this evening. Happy to take any additional questions.
I was going to throw one out, then I'll get Councilmember Smith. Would it be possible to increase rates for certain, but then leave like seniors down at like 25 cents to have like a tiered levels?
Yeah, very possible. We don't, in our current environment, we don't have any real fare programs other than the on-demand services. So
no, certainly
that
that's always a concern of mine, is, increasing the cost, especially people on fixed income, so it's just always trying to, balance out all that mix. So my next question is, Kansas City, they're still moving towards free transit, correct?
Yes.
Is that including their flex routes that they have?
As long as they're not on demand.
As long as they're not on demand. Okay, I was just kind of curious about where that. Okay, Councilmember Smith.
In addition to Adam's data request, if we're going to start looking at shaving hours off on either end, I'm going to assume you have you could give us a distribution of ridership across the entire day, like into just a bar graph or something like that. That'd be really useful to look at just to see where the bulk of that bell curve lands. I'm going to guess it's a bell curve in the morning around work hours, and then again on the return trip. If we could get something like that, that'd be really helpful. Second thing, and I don't know how to phrase it tactfully, but when I see Harrah's being one of the #1 drop-off zones, it makes me think, could they be contributing to the folks who are going to and from Harrah's? Could they be pitching in for those types of trips? And I don't know if that's been a subject that's been discussed with Julie or with Harrah's in any capacity, or if that's something you do on any other routes, like entertainment venues, where they help with some of the cost to bring customers in. Is that something that you've done in the past?
This is David again. We have certainly pursued private sector funding. We're approached all the time by the business community to provide additional service. And often, especially in the case of Kansas City, Missouri, where we use a dedicated source of funding, that funding is essentially fixed by the city. And so adding new services to the cost of Kansas City, Missouri is usually not possible without taking it from somewhere else. So what we've suggested to people who make those requests is that they either contribute directly or set up some sort of funding mechanism that will allow them to contribute a new source of revenue. So the best example would be a community improvement district or a transportation development district, like what's used for the streetcar. So the only success we've had, truly success we've had so far, is in Wyandotte County. A new logistics center is opening up for urban outfitters, and through participation from the Kansas Department of Transportation, they set up a CID that will contribute to the cost of new service to that facility. So yes, we've attempted conversations, we've had few successes, but happy to be at the table with Harrah's or anybody else from the private sector who you think might or should be contributing to the cost of service.
I appreciate that. I know that Harrah's keeps data on value per customer, value for every time the turnstiles move. So if, say, the driver was able to keep a tally of how many people are dropped off there versus what they're making per customer, they could contribute a number that would still make sense for them. But it's just a discussion that I think would be very useful to have.
Can I ask a question? It doesn't pertain to our fixed or to our flex service. I just want to make sure I understand something on Armour Road. We used to have a couple of routes that went on Armour Road. Are you saying right now that service has been suspended, that we don't have a route that's going east-west on Armour Road at this time?
We do not.
I had a question back to the Harrah's comment. I think some people, hopefully, that are going to Harrah's in North Kansas City are working there as well. So I would hate to penalize someone for working at Harrah's versus working at Save-A-Lot. But I do agree that the hours of usage would be really helpful, like Jesse had suggested, just so we can see when these rides are happening and where they're going.
I'll jump on real, since we're already throwing out a big data request here. Can I go ahead and get like the total number with the locations? I know you kind of had them broken out in a graph, but like the total number of drop-offs at locations or pickup locations.
Absolutely. I will add on the Harris comment. We operate with Kansas City, Missouri funding a service called the Casino Cruiser that does also serve Harris. That's a 7-day-a-week, all-day service. It runs hourly. So that if there were a conversation about contributing to that, we would want to lump that in since that's providing essential job access from Kansas City, Missouri and further north to the other casinos.
All right. Anybody have any further questions? Seeing no other questions, Eric, did you have anything else, or you looking for guidance tonight? Okay, go ahead.
Yes. So we were not expecting any kind of decisions or anything from the city council tonight. The way that we'd structured the month of May is that your next work session will feature an alternative method of transportation within the city, more of a taxi-based model with a company that we had been talking about working with a few years ago. So we want to present that option to you and have the company, go through, possibilities there. Then our thought would be after May 18th on June 1st, we'd maybe ask you to indicate a direction that you might like to go between those two different models. And then based upon what you indicate, we would perhaps have a contract of some sort on your agenda with one, either KCATA or perhaps an alternative provider on June 15th. So that's kind of how we had plotted out this transportation discussion. That's your next work session is scheduled to be on a sort of as we're calling it, a taxi-based model.
Okay, perfect. No, thank you everyone from KCATA for getting on and presenting that, for all the information, and look forward to seeing the additional data. If there are no other comments from council members, is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Sorry, Lisa, did you have a question?
Nope, I just seconded.
Okay, perfect. Recalling roll for this one, or are we just going?
I think you can do it by acclamation, sir.
There we go. Seeing none opposed, we are adjourned.
This isn't over. We still have to slow the spread and do our part. Let's wear face masks in public. Stay 6 feet or more from others. Follow state and local guidelines. Wash our hands frequently. And